When we arrived in Tel Aviv, it was like I was coming to outer space. It means it was something completely new. I find myself in a car, sitting near Moshe Dayan, and we have to find how to begin a conversation. And I've read in the book that he was interested in archaeology. So I mentioned that I was interested in archaeology, and we begin to talk archaeology.
The Israeli people greeted Sadat's arrival from Egypt as though he were Moses, come again.
I come to you today with a firm desire to make peace.
Sadat offered peace, but he was careful not to abandon the other Arab states or the Palestinians.
There are Arab lands still under Israeli occupation. We insist on complete withdrawal from these territories, including Arab Jerusalem. It was quite a speech, quite disturbing. I passed a note to Begin saying we must be on our guard.
Ezra Weizmann, the defense minister, who was a great advocate for peace, said when he heard the speech that maybe we should mobilize the reserves.
The visitors went from the Knesset to a dinner in their honor.
It was a kind of dinner where there was not much talk. The atmosphere was cool.
President Sadat and Mr. Begin were not speaking to each other. They were sitting with their backs to each other. I decided to invite Ezer Weizmann and another minister up to my suite after dinner.
Mustafa Khalil told me, we have to do something. Otherwise, the whole trip will be without any follow-up. What about having a meeting together? I say, no objection.
So now I found myself sitting with our worst enemy at the King David Hotel, drinking Black Label.
I want to enter directly in the process and mentioning what are the problems of Cairo today and the problems of Egypt, and this is why we need peace.
I said, let me show you something. I took him to the window. I said, take a good look. Do you really think you can divide this city?
I say the solution is this direct talk with the leadership of Israel, and through this direct talk, direct contact, everything will be solved.
It wasn't that simple. After the trip to Jerusalem, the two sides continued to talk for 7 months. But Begin would not give an inch. Sadat confided in the new President of the United States.
Sadat felt that the peace process, instead of having been moved forward, had actually been almost terminated by a fruitless gesture to go to Jerusalem. So he was quite discouraged.
I asked President Carter, the Senate, the Congress, to take their share as full partners in the dispute that's between us and Israel. I'm waiting for this moment.
I found myself isolated from all my advisors. All of them thought that it was a bad idea.
President Carter then set out to resolve 30 years of conflict in a week of talks at the presidential retreat at Camp David.
We arrived by helicopters, and we find this kind of small bungalows in the forest. People quite relaxed. People were using bicycles, and it was quite strange for us.
Some of the Americans even brought their children. The National Security Advisor challenged Israel's prime minister to a game of chess. and got a preview of his negotiating technique.
I was about to make my first move when he dramatically seized my hand in midair and looked me straight in the eye and said, and he's always very serious and formal, "Dr. Brzezinski, do you know when I played my last chess game?" And quite frankly, I was a little dismayed because I couldn't care less. And he says to me, "September 1940, when the NKVD broke into my hiding place in Vilna to arrest me." So I said to myself, oh my God. And in the midst of the game, Mrs. Begin appears. She looks at us and says, "Oh, the two of you are playing chess. You know, Mr. Brzezinski, Menachem just loves to play. He just loves to play. He plays all the time."
When President Carter brought the two leaders together, Sadat listed the demands: the return of the Sinai to Egypt and a Palestinian state in the West Bank, with its capital in Jerusalem.
Sadat and I both knew that this was not going to be at all acceptable to me or the Israelis.
We all hit the roof, not just Begin. They were taking a hard line. We all said, this simply won't work.
They wanted to storm out, to terminate the talks. And I jumped up from the desk where I was sitting and writing and got in the door in front of them. And I wouldn't let them get out of the room until they both agreed to let me try to continue. And after that, the two men never saw each other for the next 10 days.
The incompatibilities between the two sides were so intense that some sort of an American document bridging the gap and extracting from each side those relatively few elements on the part of each side that were of a compromise nature seemed to us to be the only way to proceed.
So I carried the same text back and forth. Begin and Sadat agreed to go with the same text, with brackets and modifications and marginal notes.
Carter focused their attention on a clause that would require Israel to give up Gaza and the West Bank to the Palestinians.
Begin simply dug in his heels and says this is totally unacceptable.
As far as he was concerned, this was Greater Israel, Eretz Israel, and they hadn't acquired territory by force. It had always been ordained as part of Israel.
Begin remained intransigent, so Carter persuaded Sadat to give up his demand for a Palestinian state, to the outrage of his advisors.
It was a real shock for us. Our main preoccupation was to avoid a bilateral agreement between Israel and Egypt at the expense of the Palestinians.
But that wasn't enough for the Israelis.
They say, no. They are refusing to withdraw from the Sinai, that they want to maintain the 3 airports, that they want to maintain the settlements.
The Israelis delegated Moshe Dayan to convince Sadat that he would have to compromise on the Sinai, too.
Dayan told him, Mr. President, if anybody has told you that Israel can leave the Sinai settlements, they are deluding you. President Sadat was so upset that he asked me for airplanes. He said, I'm leaving. If I cannot even get Sinai back, then what is the use of my continuing this peace process?
I asked Sadat if he would go back in his cabin and talk to me. All of his bags were on the front porch. I told Sadat he had betrayed our friendship. He had violated a commitment that he made to me, that he would give me full opportunity to resolve any differences that arose, and that I thought that his peremptory action in leaving without giving me another chance would also seriously and adversely affect the relationships between our two countries.
Sadat unpacked his bags. Carter would now have to get the Israeli Prime Minister to yield.
I was about to play tennis. I was dressed in whites. Begin was always dressed as if he was about to go to a funeral. And we went for a walk in the Camp David woods. And he says to me very dramatically, I want you to understand that my right eye will fall out. My right hand will fall off before I ever sign a single scrap of paper permitting the dismantling of a single Jewish settlement.
Prime Minister Begin had taken a solemn oath before God and the Israeli people that he would not dismantle Israeli settlements. So I had to devise an alternative to that so that he would not do it.
Carter urged Begin's advisors to find a way around their prime minister's solemn oath.
The only way was to let the Knesset make the decision and not him.
Dayan and Weitzman started speaking up to Begin in Hebrew rather than in English as they did in the past.
I said we cannot go back empty-handed. We must find a compromise.
Begin's colleagues concluded that the only way to persuade him that dismantling the settlements would not damage him politically was to get the settlers' champion on the phone.
Prime Minister Begin, God rest his soul, told me there are problems over the Jewish settlements in the Sinai. He wanted to know where I stood. I answered in one sentence, I will support any decision you take.
Prime Minister Begin's phone call opened the way for a White House ceremony. The Knesset voted to dismantle the Sinai settlements. Egypt became the first Arab state to recognize Israel's right to exist. Israel gave back the Sinai.
Let's have a handshake before we back.
Sadat and Begin were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
I'm so proud of both of you. God bless you.
While we have the ceremony and the different speeches and the different signatures, we were listening to the Palestinians, which were outside, and was just shouting to remind us that the Palestinian problem have not been solved.
The peace with Israel that Sadat concluded has lasted to this day. But many Arabs were enraged. 2 years later, at a military display in Cairo, Islamic extremists assassinated Anwar Sadat.